Side 2. Chapter 4. Dinah's birthday. Dinah thought the Benedict business would put the others off Hunky Parker. She was wrong. They were quiet and shaken for a day or two, but only until the next programme. Then they were as hunky mad as ever. Dinah began to spend more and more time in her bedroom, because it was the only way to escape. Well, I'm not having a hunky birthday party anyway, she thought. She shook her head politely when Mrs. Hunter suggested a pig cake. I'd rather have it iced like a calculator, if you don't mind. Mrs. Hunter didn't argue. Well, if you're sure. But on the day of the party, she looked regretfully at the tea table. A Hunky Parker cake would have been more striking. It's lovely like this, Dinah said firmly. She looked at the sandwiches and little sausages, the biscuits with clown faces on, and the little chocolate cakes. A real family birthday party. Thank you, Mum. She hugged Mrs. Hunter, and then went off to open the front door, to let in Ingrid and Ian and Mandy. Ingrid was bouncing, holding something flat and rectangular.
Wait till you see what I've got. I've been waiting for them to come on sale here.
Lloyd and Harvey came racing down the stairs. Go on, Di, said Lloyd. Open it. Dinah looked down. The shape of the parcel looked frighteningly familiar. She had a nasty feeling.
Go on!
Harvey was getting impatient. Dinah undid the sellotape and took off the paper. She swallowed. It was a Hunky Parker video. Thanks, she said stiffly. Harvey goggled.
Where did you find it, Ing? They've just come into the shops, Ingrid said. This morning.
She hopped down the hall on one foot, grinning all over her face.
You'll love it. It's brilliant.
My present's even better, drawled Ian, holding out a long roll. Here you are. Dinah undid the string, and the roll unwound itself suddenly, slithering about in her hands. There, staring up at her, was a vast picture of Hunky Parker, with every disgusting detail larger than life. Honey-coloured hamburgers, yelled Lloyd. That's fantastic! Ian smiled modestly. You can stick it over your bed, Di. Then it'll be the first thing you see when you wake up. Dinah could just imagine it. She made herself smile again. Thanks very much.
No, Mandy's!
Harvey was really enjoying himself. As Dinah took Mandy's parcel, he pushed closer to her so he could be the first to see what was inside. I hope you like it, Mandy said. I made it myself. That didn't sound like Hunky Parker. Dinah grinned at her, slipped off the paper, and froze. Now that is educated, murmured Ian. Really takes you out of your sty, doesn't it? Dinah was speechless. Inside the parcel was a pyjama case in the shape of Hunky Parker, dirt and all. There was even a grey satin lining to the snout to make it look really slimy. I'll die if I have to put my pyjamas in that, she thought. But she smiled again. That's wonderful, Mandy. Thanks. Let's play some games, shall we? Lloyd's got a list. With a nod, Lloyd began to organise everyone. We're going in the garden. Did you bring your trainers like I told you to?
Sure did.
Ingrid stood on her head and waggled her feet in the air. Lloyd waved a hand. Get ours out then, H. Harvey went to rummage in the cupboard under the stairs. After a few moments, he stuck his head out, frowning.
I can't see Dinah's.
Mrs. Hunter came out of the dining room. That's because I've sent her old ones to the jumble sale. Hang on. She pulled a carrier bag out of the cupboard and handed it to Dinah. I hope these are all right. Dinah had a terrible sinking feeling. She slid her hand into the bag and pulled out a pair of Hunky trotters. It was the last straw. She dropped them on the floor, put her face in her hands, and burst into tears.
"What's up with you?" said Harvey. "I wouldn't be crying if I had a pair of trotters."
Mrs. Hunter picked them up and looked helplessly at them. "There wasn't any point in asking if you liked them, Dinah. There's nothing else in the shops. I had to buy trotters. I... Dinah tried to stop crying, but she couldn't. It was awful. She just went on, sobbing.
"What's the matter?" said Ingrid, turning the right way up again. "Don't you like Hunky Parker, Di?"
Mandy looked horrified.
"Why didn't you say?"
"It's her own fault," Lloyd muttered crossly. "She's never watched any of the programmes. She doesn't understand about Hunky."
"Well, we can soon change that."
Ingrid beamed and picked up the video she had just given Dinah.
"Come on."
"It's my birthday," thought Dinah, "and I don't want to watch a Hunky Parker video." But how could she refuse? "All right," she said in a small, tight voice. Mrs. Hunter smiled and went off to the kitchen, and the others hustled Dinah into the sitting room. They were eager, even if she wasn't. In a few seconds, they were all sitting down, staring at the television screen. "Ready?" said Lloyd. He pressed the button on the remote control, and there was Hunky Parker leering at them. "Ready, everyone?" he said in his horrible, smug voice. "This'll take you out of your sty and plaster you all over the road, so don't even blink in case you miss something." "Yuck," thought Dinah. "Yuck, yuck, yuck." But she forced herself to keep watching as Hunky waddled towards a shop full of wedding dresses. It didn't take much to guess what was going to happen. She tried not to shudder. And then her brain twitched. That was the only way to describe it. One second she was thinking, yuck, and the next she was thinking, Hunky's all right, really. Quite. She went very still and stiff in her chair, fighting the feeling. Her mind couldn't change, not on its own, not for no reason. Then it happened again. Hunky began smearing mud down the wedding dresses, and suddenly she thought, maybe those trotters are worth having. No! She couldn't bear it. She had to stop the video. Grabbing the remote control from Lloyd's lap, she stabbed at it with her finger, and the picture on the screen froze. Dinah sighed with relief. But only for a second. Then she was staring at the screen again, completely baffled. The picture that was frozen there didn't seem to belong to the video at all. "Orange ostrich eggs! What are you doing?" Lloyd reached for the remote control, and then stopped with a frown. "What's that?"
"It's not on the video,"
Ingrid said in a puzzled voice.
"I watched it all the way through before I wrapped it up, and I didn't see that."
Frozen on the screen was a picture of Hunky Parker. The familiar, dirty, slobbering face stared out at them, just as it stared out from their T-shirts and from 100 things they saw every day. But it wasn't a cartoon anymore. It was a mask. And through the mask, cold, sea-green eyes were staring at them. They were glittering, riveting eyes. Dinah felt them drilling into her head, branding the pig's image on her brain so that she couldn't get rid of it. Below the face was a card with 3 words painted on it in clear black letters. Hunky or nothing. "Go on with the video," Lloyd said harshly. "Let's see what comes next." Dinah picked up the remote control again and pressed play. Instantly they were back in the wedding dress shop, watching Hunky trampling white satin under his trotters. She shivered. "Go back," Lloyd said. "Freeze that frame again." Dinah tried. 3 times she pressed the button too late and froze pictures of Hunky in the wedding dress shop. But the 4th time, she hit it at exactly the right instant. There was the masked figure again, with the same notice and the same icy, unblinking eyes. Harvey wriggled in his chair.
I don't understand. You've just been straight past this bit without stopping. Why didn't we see this picture then, when the video was running?
I think there wasn't time, Dinah said slowly, working it out as she spoke.
It must be just a single frame. You mean it flashed past too fast for us to see?
Mandy looked puzzled.
What's the point of that?
Oh, we saw it all right, Dinah swallowed. She remembered exactly the terrifying way her mind had obeyed the picture.
But we didn't know we'd seen it, and wait a minute.
She rewound the video to the place where Hunky was going into the wedding dress shop. That was where her brain had twitched first, where she had started to think Hunky's all right, really. And somewhere there... It took her longer to find the hidden frame this time, because she wasn't sure exactly where to look. But none of the others complained as she flicked the video backwards and forwards, on and off. They were all concentrating on the screen. At last she hit it. The same frame, with the masked figure holding the black and white notice, and the same paralyzing eyes.
It's stupid.
Ingrid glared uncomfortably at the screen.
What's the use of putting in pictures that no one knows about? Who's going to take any notice of that?
You might not take any notice now you know about it, murmured Ian, but when it was hidden...
Subliminal,
Dinah said in a hard, angry voice.
That's what they call it. It's a subliminal frame, meant to put things into people's minds without letting them realize it.
Lloyd stared at the screen. Do you think, he said slowly, that there are other frames like that? Maybe on the TV programs?
I'm sure there are, Dinah said.
So we've been tricked. Lloyd looked away from the masked face. Is that why I felt so angry with Benedict for not liking Hunky Parker?
That's why you liked Hunky Parker in the first place, Dinah said fiercely. Don't you remember? None of you could stand him until you saw Ingrid's video. I bet that's chock full of subliminal frames. To make people want Hunky Parker things,
Mandy said. Dinah nodded.
Anything with that face on.
She frowned at the screen.
If you watch Hunky Parker, you'll do whatever that monster tells you.
Ian looked stunned, but Ingrid went red in the face.
I don't believe it, she said stubbornly. I don't like Hunky because of some freaky thing on your video. I like him because he's nice.
OK, Dinah said quietly. Go and get your video, and we'll have a look at that. 20 minutes later, they were staring at the masked face again. But this time, it was on Ingrid's video, and she was as horrified as everyone else.
We've got to phone the police, she said grimly, to tell them the Hunky Parker people are tricking everyone.
Lloyd didn't usually take orders from Ingrid, but this time he jumped up straight away. The others crowded round the telephone as he found the number of the police station and dialed. The moment someone answered, he began talking. I want to make a complaint about a Hunky Parker video. There was a deep chuckle from the other end. Oh, an educated complaint. And what's the matter with your video? It's got... Lloyd put his hand over the mouthpiece and hissed at Dinah. What's it called?
Subliminal frames.
Subliminal frames, Lloyd repeated into the telephone. You can't see them unless you freeze them. At least you do, but you don't know. And they make you want to buy Hunky Parker things. You can't help yourself. The voice chuckled again.
That's the excuse you're giving your mother, is it, Swilliant, sonny? Wish I'd thought of it myself. No, Lloyd said desperately. I'm not joking. This is serious.
The policeman paused for a moment, and Lloyd bit his tongue.
Please listen, he wanted to yell. You've got to listen.
But he made himself wait.
Tell you what, the policeman said at last. I'm going off duty now, but I wouldn't mind taking a look at your video. How about bringing it in tomorrow afternoon? Wednesday, Lloyd said. Great, we'll come after school. I'll make a note of it then. What's your name and address?
Lloyd told him and said goodbye. As he put the phone down, he heard the policeman chuckle again. He was speaking to someone at the other end of the line.
Just heard a good one about a Hunky Parker video.
Ingrid heard it too. She frowned.
He thinks it's funny.
So?
Ian shrugged.
He'll change his mind when he sees the video. He can say what he likes till then.
Lloyd nodded. But Dinah had a strange, uneasy feeling. She wished she knew who had been listening to the policeman's joke. Chapter 5. Gone. The moment school was over next day, they all raced back to the Hunter's house to fetch the videos. Harvey was first into the sitting room. He looked along the row of videos on the shelf and frowned. Then he knelt down and pressed eject. Nothing slid out of the machine. Lloyd frowned.
Where's your video, Di? Did you take it upstairs?
Dinah shook her head.
I didn't touch it. And what about Ingrid's? That ought to be here too.
Lloyd checked the video shelf again, but there was no Hunky Parker video.
Mum must have moved them. I'll go and ask her.
But when he went into the kitchen, Mrs. Hunter shook her head. You know I always leave the videos alone. That machine's beyond me.
What about Dad?
He didn't even go in there. He came in late and went straight to bed. Lloyd felt as though someone had laid an icy finger on the back of his neck. The others were drifting into the kitchen, but he didn't have time to explain. He had to find out what had happened.
Has anyone else been here?
Mrs. Hunter looked puzzled. No, I don't think so. Only the man to service the television. Why do you...
The man to service the television?
Dinah said.
What do you mean? No one services the television.
Oh. Mrs. Hunter stopped and frowned. I suppose you're right. But I was busy and he had an identity card and brown overalls with a badge like a uniform, so I didn't think. What's all this about, anyway? Harvey went pink.
He wasn't a real television man. He came to steal Dinah's video and Ingrid's.
Mrs. Hunter stared for a moment. Then she began to laugh. Harvey, what a load of nonsense. How could he have known the videos were here? Anyway, I can't see what all the fuss is about. I thought Dinah hated Hunky Parker. She shooed them out of the kitchen, and they stood in the hall staring at each other. None of them could quite believe what had happened.
Do you think it was the policeman?
Faltered Harvey.
He was the only person we told. But he told other people, Lloyd said grimly. I bet he told everyone who walked into the police station last night. And one of those people must have been the man in brown overalls, or someone connected with him. What does it matter who it was? Drawled Ian. If we haven't got the video, no one's going to believe us. We can't do anything. We've got to do something, Lloyd said stubbornly. We can't just give up.
For a second they stared at each other. Then Dinah turned and ran upstairs. When she came down, she was carrying her money box.
Right,
she said in a quiet, angry voice.
We're going to the shops.
Harvey looked puzzled.
But that's your computer money, Di. You've been saving up for months.
Computers can wait,
Dinah said. "Right now, what I want most in the world is another Hunky Parker video. Come on."
They went to Woolworth's first, because it was nearest. But as soon as they walked through the door, they could see that there was something peculiar going on. The walls were plastered with advertisements for the Sty, the educated holiday, sun tomorrow, snow today. And all round them were shelves crammed with Hunky Parker things. Clothes and sweets and pictures and toys, the sort of stuff that people were usually fighting to buy. But no one was paying any attention to those. Everyone in the shop had crowded round the video shelves, and angry voices were shouting backwards and forwards. Old ladies waved their umbrellas, children wailed, and men in smart suits banged their fists on the counter.
"It's no use hanging round here," Dinah said quickly. "We can't even see the videos. Let's go somewhere else."
She led the way out of the shop before Lloyd had a chance to argue, and walked along to Smith's. But that was just the same. Hunky Parker pens and notebooks and calculators were standing untouched, and there was a huge crowd of people at the far end of the shop where the videos were kept. This crowd was even uglier than the one in Woolworth's. People were beginning to stamp their feet, and some of them were shouting, "We want the manager!" Lloyd felt uneasy.
"Something's up, isn't it? You think it could have anything to do with the man in brown overalls?" "We haven't got time to chat," Dinah said grimly. "We can do that afterwards, when we've got a video. Come on."
She marched out of the shop, and the others had to follow her. But Lloyd hung behind, glancing over his shoulder. He could hear the chant changing behind him, and he knew what the crowd was saying even before he made out the words. "Hunky or nothing! Hunky or nothing!" With a shudder, he ran out of the shop and chased after the others. He didn't know what was causing all the trouble, but he didn't like the sound of that crowd. Dinah was heading for the little bookshop at the bottom of the hill. Mrs. French, the bookseller, wouldn't have anything to do with television, but she stocked 1 or 2 videos on a stand at the back of the shop. Lloyd was sure the Hunky Parker one would be there. But it wasn't. They could see that as soon as they pushed open the shop door. The video stand was completely empty. When Lloyd caught sight of it, he felt his face go red and his heart start to thud.
"Fancy not having any Hunky videos," whispered a little voice in his head. "It's disgusting. They should have Hunky. Hunky or nothing. Hunky."
And like an echo, 2 voices spoke right in front of him.
"She should have it," said Mandy. "Hunky or nothing," snapped Ingrid.
"No!" Lloyd clenched his fists. "Can't you see what's happening to you? It's the subliminal frames!" Mandy went white, and Ingrid clapped her hands over her mouth. In the sudden silence, they heard more voices coming from round the corner, where Mrs. French had her office. "You think we're idiots? We know that video's out. If you haven't got any, you'll have to get some. Hunky or nothing!" Lloyd and Dinah looked at each other. Dinah nodded, and Lloyd led the way up the shop to the office. Mrs. French was sitting behind her desk, cowering backwards, as 3 teenage boys loomed over her, shouting furiously. "I can't help it," she said plaintively. "People keep coming in and asking for Hunky videos, but there's nothing I can do. I did have some in yesterday, but the van came round this morning and took them away." The tallest boy growled at her. "Took them all away?" "The delivery man said they were faulty," Mrs. French said. "I haven't had any complaints, but that didn't make any difference. He refunded my money, and he took every one." The tall boy leaned forward and grabbed the collar of her blouse. "Then you'll have to order some more, won't you?" he said nastily. "Right away." "Oh, I have already." Mrs. French picked up a piece of paper and flapped it desperately under his nose. "But he said they couldn't deliver them for at least a week." "Then you'll have to go and get them, won't you?" The boy began to shake her. "Where do they come from?" "I'm not—" Mrs. French started to choke as her collar tightened. "I'm not allowed
allowed to tell. I had to sign a contract.
Lloyd glanced sideways at Dinah and the others. Splat couldn't just stand there while Mrs. French got beaten up. He'd have to give them an order. But before he could think of the right order to give, there was a noise from outside, a steady, rhythmic shouting, and the sound of tramping feet. It sounded as though a lot of people were coming down the hill. The three boys let go of Mrs. French and pushed past Lloyd and the others, hurrying towards the door. Mandy ran into the office.
Are you all right, Mrs. French? Do you need any help? No, thank you, dear. I'm just a bit shaken up. I knew I was in for trouble. The moment the delivery man walked in this morning and I saw his brown overall, What is that noise?
She got to her feet, looking rather wobbly, and made for the doorway. The three boys were still blocking it, but suddenly they gave a great whoop and charged out. Lloyd followed Mrs. French to the door and looked up the hill. He could hardly believe his eyes. There was a huge crowd marching down towards them, filling the whole road. And from the crowd came a steady chant, keeping pace with the marching feet. "Hunky or nothing! Hunky or nothing!" Mrs. French swallowed.
It's like an army. What do they want?
Dinah twisted her hands together.
They're making sure all the shops keep stocking Hunky Parker goods, she said in a small, tight voice. No one will dare to run out now.
Mrs. French didn't listen. She stood up very straight, making a sudden decision.
Well, they're not coming in here. I'm going to shut the shop. I'll have to turn you all out.
Mandy looked nervously up the hill.
We'd better go quickly then. We don't want to get mixed up with them. Where's Ingrid?
Ingrid was sauntering up from the back of the shop with her hands in her pockets. Typical, thought Lloyd, but he didn't waste time telling her off for being awkward. He grabbed her arm and pushed her out of the shop in front of him. As Mrs. French locked the door behind them, they ran down the road and round the first corner, and then stopped to watch the huge crowd go past. It was an awe-inspiring sight. There must have been several hundred people, all marching and chanting together.
It's just like Mrs. French said, stuttered Harvey. They're like an army.
Dinah nodded grimly.
And what I'd like to know is, who's giving them orders? Where does all this Hunky Parker stuff come from?
We'll never find that out, said Lloyd with his eyes still on the crowd. Didn't you hear what Mrs. French said? The shopkeepers aren't allowed to tell. We've lost your video, and we haven't got a hope of tracking down another one.
Oh, yes, we have, said Ingrid.
She sounded so smug that they all turned round to look at her. Pulling a tiny torn scrap of paper out of her pocket, she waved it under their noses.
It's a good thing someone's got some brains.
Ian blinked.
That's your brains?
Ingrid kicked him.
It's the address Mrs. French orders her Hunky videos from.
She waved it again triumphantly.
I ripped off the corner of the paper while you were all gazing out of the door.
Lloyd leaned forward and read the address.
It's miles away.
It wouldn't take very long on the train, Dinah said thoughtfully. Only a couple of hours.
But think what it would cost, Mandy sighed. And we've spent all the SPLAT savings on those stupid T-shirts. How can we go?
Dinah shook her money box.
I've got enough in here. We can go tomorrow. What about school? Said Harvey.
Dinah stuck up her chin. She looked very pale and determined. We'll go first thing in the morning, before school starts.
Mum won't let us, said Lloyd.
Then we'll go even earlier than that,
Dinah said fiercely.
Before she's up. Don't you see? There's something terrible going on, and no one knows except us. We've got to do something about it.
Chapter 6. Parker Products Limited. It was still dark when Dinah, Lloyd and Harvey left home the next morning. They took their packed lunches and left a note propped on top of the fridge. Gone to a special outing. Sorry we didn't tell you about it before. Love, L, H and D. They met the others at the station and caught a very early train. It was still before 9 o'clock when they got off at the other end.
But how will we find the factory?
Harvey had been getting more and more anxious all the way.
We haven't got a map.
We'll ask,
Lloyd said. He marched briskly up to the barrier, waving the scrap of paper with the address on it. The ticket collector looked at the name of the road and grinned. No problem. Turn left outside the station, then second right and first left and you're there. But he shook his head when they mentioned Hunky Parker. Never heard of anything like that round here. It's all DIY and carpet showrooms. I wouldn't mind, though. I like that Hunky Parker.
You do?
Mandy said faintly.
Got educated socks, haven't I?
Pulling up his trouser legs, the ticket collector did a little dance. There, leering up from his ankles, was Hunky Parker's face. Dinah shuddered. The more she saw that face, the worse she felt. Let's get on. Lloyd nodded. They were all feeling nervous, but it was no use wasting time.
Splat! Forward!
He led the way out of the station, following the directions they had been given. Dinah trailed a little behind, puzzling over what the ticket collector had said. Why hadn't he heard of the factory? If all the Hunky Parker things were made there, it must be enormous. And surely it would be bright as well. She could just imagine the slogans painted across the front. Parker products are swilliant. Hunky or nothing. Or just a giant pig's face, maybe, staring down from over the door. But there was sure to be something striking about it. Lloyd must have been looking for somewhere like that too, because he led them right past the place. Dinah suddenly realized they were outside number 96.
Hey, stop, she called softly. 84's back this way.
She turned and began to walk back, counting the numbers carefully as she went. 94, 92, 90. Even then she almost missed it. The numbers seemed to go straight from 86, which was a big carpet warehouse, to 82, which was a kitchen showroom. Dinah stopped outside and peered down the gap in between. There, set back from the road, was a narrow grey building. It had a small door, but no windows at the front. There was no notice either, except for a small brass plate beside the door. The others were still on their way back, but Dinah didn't wait for them. Slipping down the alley, she went to read the brass plate. It said, Parker Products Limited. Trembling slightly, she walked back to meet the others.
This is the place,
she murmured.
But
Lloyd stared.
It can't be. They can't make anything in there. There's no room.
Perhaps this isn't the factory, said Mandy. Maybe it's just the place that sends things to the shops.
Ingrid was getting impatient.
Why are we wasting time talking? If we want to know what's going on, we ought to ask. I'll go and knock on the door.
No! Dinah grabbed her sleeve just in time.
We mustn't let them know we're here. Not until we've seen what kind of place it is. What are we going to do then?
Ingrid looked sulky.
Stand out here staring?
Lloyd decided it was time to take charge.
We'll go round the back. There's a side road just past the carpet place. Let's try that.
Turning down the side road, they found a car park behind the carpet warehouse. And further down the road, beyond the car park, was a small, narrow alley, just wide enough for a lorry to drive through. Lloyd took a deep breath.
I bet that alley leads to Parker Products.
We'll have to go and look, Dinah said. Her heart was thudding, but there was no way out. Now they'd come so far, they had to find out what they could.
Race you,
said Ingrid boldly, but Mandy grabbed her arm.
Don't. You've got to be careful,
Ingrid snorted.
It's no use being scared. We've got to find out what's going on. Come on.
It was dark and damp in the alley. On one side was the back fence of the car park, and on the other was a row of tall, dripping trees. Dinah pulled her coat more tightly round her and made sure she kept up with the others. They came out into a concrete yard, surrounded by a high brick wall. Standing in the yard were a dozen plain grey lorries with 3 words painted on their sides in small, neat letters. Parker Products Limited. There was no one around, but large, grimy windows looked down from the back of the Parker Products building. Mandy shuddered and pulled Ingrid back into the shelter of the fence.
Suppose they look out and see us.
Dinah studied the windows.
I don't think they can. Not while we're up in this corner. We can't see much either.
We haven't come sightseeing, murmured Ian. All we need is one little video. There are probably some in those lorries if we only knew.
He smiled a slow, teasing smile.
Who's brave enough to go and look?
He meant it as a joke, but Ingrid didn't leave anyone time to laugh.
Me,
she said. Before anyone could stop her, she had darted out of the shelter of the alley and was halfway to the nearest lorry.
Ingrid!
Mandy would have followed, but Dinah held her back.
It's more dangerous if you go too, she hissed. They're more likely to notice 2 people than 1.
They stood and watched Ingrid creeping from one lorry to another. She kept looking up nervously at the big windows, but no face appeared behind the grimy glass. She crept on and on. She was heading for the furthest lorry, which had its back doors wide open.
Oh, hurry,
whispered Mandy under her breath.
Don't let them catch you.
Reaching the lorry, Ingrid hesitated for a moment, peering in. Then she clambered up and disappeared inside. The others stared at the black opening, waiting for her to reappear. But she didn't.
It's my fault,
Mandy said wretchedly.
I should never have let go of her hand. I'll go and fetch her back.
I'm smaller than you, Dinah said quickly. Mandy was much too upset to be careful.
I'll go.
Not giving herself time to think about it, she glanced up at the empty windows and then ran towards the first lorry. She worked her way along the line, just as Ingrid had done, and peered into the open doors at the end. The lorry was full of big wooden crates. Ingrid was up at the front, rummaging in one of them. Dinah called softly.
Ing, what are you doing? Checking,
hissed Ingrid.
Most of these boxes are empty, but there might be videos in one of them.
Dinah looked at the dark inside of the lorry and thought about being trapped in there. But she had to get Ingrid out. She hauled herself up and clambered in.
I'll give you a hand, but we must hurry.
She crept between the crates, reading the words on them as her eyes grew used to the dark. Ready dribbled babywear, said one, for educated piglets. Above the words was a picture of a fat baby in a baby suit with Hunky Parker's face on the front. All round the face were smears and blobs like splattered food. Yuck, thought Dinah. She crept up to Ingrid and whispered in her ear.
Which crates are left to look in?
Ingrid was just turning round to show her when there was an enormous yell from the far side of the car park where they had left the others.
Stop!
For a second, Dinah froze. Someone had seen them climbing into the lorry. Someone was coming to get them. Then there was another yell, and this time the voice was familiar.
Ouch! Let me go! You're hurting me! Harvey!
hissed Ingrid. She turned to run out of the van, but Dinah caught her just in time.
Don't be silly. Let's find out what's going on first.
The 2 of them tiptoed down to the end and peered out very cautiously. For a moment they couldn't see anything except the other lorries. Then Harvey came staggering out from behind one, struggling in the arms of a tall man in brown overalls.
What's wrong with the others?
Ingrid muttered furiously.
Why aren't they rescuing him?
She soon found out. 3 other men in brown overalls followed the first one. They were dragging Lloyd and Mandy and Ian, keeping them quiet with hands jammed over their faces. They pulled the 4 children into a row and stood perfectly still, waiting for something. For a few seconds, Dinah wondered if there was any point in charging out at them and trying to catch them off balance. But then there was another sound. The clip, clip, clip of metal heels coming across the concrete.
Well,
said a woman.
did you get them?
The voice was sharp and mean, and the woman looked the same. She was wearing grey overalls and spiky high heels, and her hair was twisted into a tight little bun. When she saw the 4 prisoners, her eyes narrowed.
"What were you up to?" she snapped. "What were you going to steal?" "Nothing!"
Harvey wriggled his mouth free and yelled at her.
"We're not thieves, and we wouldn't want anything to do with Hunky Parker."
"Oh, you idiot," thought Dinah. "Don't say anything else."
The woman was suddenly very still.
"You don't want anything to do with Hunky? Why is that, then?"
She was watching Harvey's face very closely. Dinah shivered.
"Be careful, Harvey."
But Harvey was too cross and frightened to be careful. Turning purple in the face, he screeched up at the woman.
"Because Hunky Parker's horrible! I know how you tricked people into buying all those Hunky Parker things!"
The woman's eyes snapped.
"Do you now?"
she said quietly. Her voice was very cold. She turned to the men in brown overalls and started giving orders.
"Tie them up! Put them in a lorry! And take them to the sty!"
Suddenly the men were very still. Dinah saw them look at each other.
"Oh, come on," said one.
"They're only kids. Couldn't we just give them a clip round the ear and send them home?"
"Certainly not,"
snapped the woman.
"We don't know what they've seen, and nothing must go wrong now. It's nearly time for HP9.
But the woman drew herself up.
What does Hunky say?"
Peering out of the end of the van, Dinah could see all 4 of the men. As the woman spoke, their faces changed. Their eyes glazed over, and they chanted back at her in a steady, mechanical sing-song. "Hunky says no snooping."
"That's right,"
the woman said silkily.
"All snoopers have to be sent to the sty for a little talk with Hunky. Now get on with it."
She stood with her arms folded, watching as first Lloyd and Harvey and then Ian and Mandy were gagged and trussed up in one of the vans. When they were all in, she nodded.
"On your way. You ought to be in Wales before lunchtime."
"Wales?"
Ingrid's mouth fell open, but she was too horrified to speak. Dinah's brain whirled. They had no hope of getting the others free on their own, but they could get in touch with the police, especially if they had the registration number of the lorry. She leaned out as far as she dared, watching the men close up the heavy doors to shut the others in. She couldn't quite see the number, but when the van swung round into the alley, there would be a very good view. Maybe there was, but she didn't see it. As one of the men walked round to the front to start the lorry up, the grey lady turned impatiently to the other 3.
"Don't just hang around watching. Close up that end lorry and get all of them on the road."
That end lorry. Just in time, Dinah realised what the woman meant. Grabbing Ingrid's shoulder, she pulled her back behind the crates. They were only just out of sight when the doorway was filled by a tall figure in brown overalls. Bang! Clang! The doors crashed together, plunging the inside of the van into darkness. Ingrid's hand slid into Dinah's.
"Where do you think we're going?"
she said in a small voice.
"I think we're off to the sty,"
whispered Dinah.
"You know, that holiday place in Wales. I think all the lorries are going there." "To the sty?"
Ingrid muttered.
"I don't understand."
Dinah squeezed her hand.
"Don't worry. We're following the others. That's the main thing. We'll rescue them and sort out Hunky Parker."
As their lorry started, she stared into the darkness, wondering how on earth they were going to manage it. End of Side 2.